this great inheritance and of the duties and heavy responsibilities of sovereignty, which have now passed to my beloved daughter.
King Charles reveals Parkinson's and COPD diagnosis in national broadcast, passes power to Catherine. Amidst the ancient walls of the British royal family, which have witnessed countless historical upheavals, a quiet yet deeply meaningful transition is taking place. King Charles III, after years of holding the throne under the cautious gaze of the public, is now facing the greatest challenge of his life: illness. Recent images show a gaunt king, walking slowly and frequently absent from important events. Though the palace has only released limited information, observers have all noticed Charles's time is gradually running out, not just in terms of health, but also in power. In this context, a figure once thought to stand only in the background is now stepping forward: Princess Catherine. No longer the quiet wife of Prince William, Catherine is showing a distinct transformation from fashion icon to a true leader. She appears more frequently at public engagements, represents the royal family at international events, and most notably upholds the royal image during a time of crisis. The decision to entrust Catherine with power is not only a strategic move by the House of Windsor, but also a clear sign of a comprehensive transformation unfolding behind the gates of Buckingham. As the king gradually retreats into the background, the question arises: is the Princess of Wales truly ready to inherit both the glory and the heavy burdens of the British monarchy? In the brilliant but cold lights of the Buckingham Palace press room, King Charles III stepped up to the podium with a firm, yet clearly weary expression. At 76 years old, his silver hair thinning and his voice more hoarse than usual, he no longer resembled the imposing image the public once knew. Rumors about the king's health had been swirling since early in the year, but no one expected that he himself would be the one to tear away the veil of silence that had covered the royal household for months. "This is a new challenge," Charles said, briefly and full of implication. No disease name, no specific diagnosis was announced. He only mentioned a recent medical result that requires significant adjustments to my schedule and current role. The wording was vague, but it was enough to spark a media earthquake across the globe. Within minutes of the speech's conclusion, major news outlets rushed to publish analyses and speculations. COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Parkinson's, a progressive neurological disorder. Some even mentioned early-stage cognitive decline. However, what shocked Britain and the world even more was not the mystery behind the king's illness, but the unprecedented decision King Charles announced: the delegation of certain royal responsibilities to Catherine. The Princess of Wales, not Prince William, not any other senior royal, but Catherine, the woman once labeled a commoner, an outsider, a daughter-in-law to the monarchy. After offering polite thanks, Charles lowered his voice, his eyes pausing for a few seconds as if wrestling with inner emotion. "My family is my greatest source of strength, and Catherine, a woman of dignity, resilience, and deep compassion, is the one I trust to help guide the country through this difficult time." The room fell silent. Royal advisors glanced at one another. The media was stunned. A photo capturing the moment Catherine tightly held William's hand backstage, her eyes red with emotion, quickly went viral around the world. In less than an hour after Charles's announcement, social media erupted with hashtags like "Catherine leads," "The new era begins," and most notably, "Not my Queen Camilla," an undercurrent reminding the public of the long-standing chilly relationship between Catherine and Queen Consort Camilla. Buckingham Palace declined to comment further on the king's health, releasing only a brief statement: "This is a time that calls for calm and unity." The Princess of Wales will represent His Majesty at several key upcoming events, but that silence only added fuel to the fire. Medical experts, former royal physicians, and insiders close to the palace began appearing on television, analyzing every detail of Charles's press conference, from the slight tremor in his right hand to the unusually pale complexion of his skin. Meanwhile, images of Catherine began appearing extensively on front pages. No longer just the ideal wife standing behind William, she had now become a symbol of new leadership, the image of a young, compassionate, and modern royal family. Major newspapers ran sensational headlines: Catherine from princess to kingdom leader, Diana's legacy, reborn, Camilla steps back, Catherine steps forward. A wave of instant polls was conducted that very day. The results were staggering. Over 68% of the British public supported Catherine taking on the role of representing the king. An overwhelming figure, far surpassing the combined support for both King Charles and Camilla. Notably, the younger generation expressed excitement at the prospect of a real female leader in the palace, someone unburdened by past scandals and representing a refined and approachable image. But behind that fervent support loomed a dangerous question. Could this be the beginning of Charles's permanent retreat? And if Catherine increasingly takes center stage, what will become of William? A silent future king, stepping back, or a husband willing to let his wife shine while he waits for his moment? Even within the royal family, the atmosphere was shifting. Behind closed doors, private meetings were happening repeatedly. According to a close source, Camilla left the palace for her private residence on the very afternoon after the press conference and canceled a series of scheduled engagements. Though no official statement was made, that move was widely interpreted as a silent reaction to Charles's decision and a sign that the fractures within the royal factions were becoming more visible. Online forums became battlegrounds. One side supported the Catherine era, calling her the perfect replica of Diana. The other argued that Charles was breaking protocol and pushing the monarchy into dangerous waters by letting emotions dictate politics. But regardless of position, no one could deny after that fateful press conference, the House of Windsor would never be the same. Amid countless unanswered questions, one thing remained certain: Diana was once forced into silence in the cold quarters of the palace. But now, the daughter-in-law she had trusted and embraced was being handed the power to change everything. And if Charles is now writing the final lines of his reign, it may be Catherine who pens the next chapter, one that Britain has never seen before. And it was precisely that emotional moment at Buckingham Palace, when Catherine stepped out from behind the scenes with tearful eyes still not fully dried, that marked the beginning of a whole new chapter, not just for the British monarchy, but for the destiny of the crown itself. Alongside the shock of that unprecedented transfer of power was a mystery that had continued to stir whispers across the kingdom. What exactly is the new illness Charles is facing? The palace only confirmed that the king was going through a new medical challenge, but offered no further details. That silence, instead of easing public concern, only fueled the fire of speculation. The media quickly launched into action, dissecting every recent appearance of Charles. They scrutinized every slow-motion shot from public ceremonies, every close-up of the king's face in official videos, and soon the theories began to take shape. COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, was the first on the table. Charles's visible shortness of breath at crowded events, the persistent dry cough during speeches, or his labored breathing while leaving church in Sandringham, all seemed to match the symptoms of this illness. But it didn't stop there. A video of him shaking hands with an Australian diplomat in March 2024 was thoroughly analyzed. The king's hand trembled slightly, very slightly, lasting just over a second, but it was enough for neurological experts to raise suspicions about Parkinson's. Not only were current signs under scrutiny, but even the past was being revisited. An image of Charles with abnormally red eyes during his trip to Canada at the end of 2024, once explained as a burst blood vessel due to cabin pressure, was now viewed as an early warning sign of a neurological disorder or a complication from his cancer treatment regimen. A new picture was slowly emerging, no longer just a resilient monarch, but a man battling the harsh limitations of his own body. Since February 2024, the entire nation knew that Charles had entered cancer treatment. But no one expected that, alongside of which, then, the king was also battling another invisible enemy that was gradually eroding his strength: Every royal tour, from the sunlit visit to Australia to the Commonwealth Summit in Samoa, became a testament to the iron will of a monarch who refused to collapse. But the braver he was, the more his exhaustion showed. Beneath the stage lights and ceremonial smiles, his body was slowly crying out for rest. And in the solitude that the crown always brings, Charles turned to Catherine, the woman who was not only a symbol of gentleness, but also someone who had walked through the very pain he was now enduring. At Sandringham, in a quiet room with only the sound of wind rustling through ancient window panes, two people from two generations and two vastly different destinies had a conversation that needed no many words. Charles did not hide anything. For the first time, he told Catherine about the dull, aching pains that kept him awake at night, about the feeling of losing control when his hand began to tremble while signing documents, about the fear when his eyes could no longer focus on small lines of text. Catherine listened quietly, no questions, no rebuttals, because she understood. Understood like someone who once looked into a mirror and wondered if tomorrow would still come. Understood like a mother who had once held her children's hands without daring to promise she'd always be there. Between them, a new bond was formed beyond royal hierarchy. It was a connection between people who had faced the fragility of life. And from that empathy, Charles made a historic decision to entrust Catherine with representing him in a series of upcoming events. Not as a temporary figurehead, but as a spiritual successor, the new face of leadership that Britain was searching for. But a chilling question quietly crept into the minds of royal watchers. Was this decision only temporary? Or was it truly the beginning of a silent abdication? For never before in modern history had a princess been granted the king's representative powers while he was still alive and fully competent. Viewed through the lens of royal politics, this move was a whisper of an unofficial transfer of power, where the throne was slowly becoming a shadow of an era retreating into the past. While the media remained busy hunting down Charles's mysterious medical file, Catherine began to appear with a different aura, stronger, more resolute. At the memorial ceremony at Westminster, she no longer stood behind William. Instead, she stood center stage, speaking with a steady voice, sharp eyes, and a presence that stunned even her former skeptics. And amid the applause and bows of respect, one person watched silently from a balcony behind the scenes, Camilla. Her eyes were quiet, her expression unreadable, but the trace of worry was unmistakable, because she knew that for the first time in years, another woman was stepping onto the stage of power, not through rivalry, but through the absolute trust of the king himself. Charles now was no longer the one holding the future of the monarchy. He was the man recounting his final chapters with honesty, with tears, and by placing his trust in the next generation. And as Catherine began to lead in his stead, the public no longer asked who was reigning, but began to ask who deserves to be followed. And it was that unwavering trust that created an unprecedented event in royal history. Charles did not choose the rightful heir, Prince William, but instead handed the reins of leadership during crisis to Catherine, the woman once known only by the title Princess of Wales. But behind that shocking decision was not a whim. It was the result of a special relationship, a bond forged through pain, fear, and the most human of moments between two people seemingly separated by title and generation. Since their shared health battles, Charles and Catherine had become strangely close, not through formal rituals, but through late-night conversations in the cold library at Sandringham. Not through lavish dinners, but through handwritten letters, lines of ink, and tears, where Charles called Catherine my rock, a term both affectionate and a confession of reliance from a man long accustomed to loneliness under royal robes. They strolled together along the small paths in Sandringham Gardens, where there were no reporters, no protocol. There, they shared their fears of waking up each morning unsure how much time they had left. They spoke of looking into the mirror and not recognizing themselves after each round of treatment. And from those shared pains, Catherine became the one Charles trusted most. Not because she was William's wife, but because she was the only one who didn't pretend, who didn't bow, who didn't say comforting things just to soothe him. She has something all of us have lost long ago who are untouched by power. Charles once said to a close advisor, and from that recognition, something unexpected happened. He began to seek Catherine's opinion on important decisions. He asked her to review speeches before they were delivered. He let her rewrite key messages to be sent to international leaders. A gentle yet sharp-minded Catherine gradually became the king's unofficial advisor, a role far beyond what any prince's wife had ever been given. And then, when faced with the ultimate choice who will carry the torch if he can no longer stand, Charles chose not to look to the throne, but to his heart. He knew William was the rightful heir. But he also understood that William carried wounds still unhealed from the past. Silent resentments never spoken aloud, especially toward his own father. In contrast, Catherine carried none of those scars. She came into this family by choice, by love, and with the belief that she could soothe the blocks of ice hardened by years of conflict. Charles saw her as a daughter not only because she was the mother of his beloved grandchildren, but because she had proven that courage does not always require a loud voice. It can come from a woman who chooses silence, yet still guards what is most sacred. And in Charles's eyes, Catherine embodies the future he had longed for but never could grasp: a humane, united royal family, no longer a fortress of pretense. Thus, when Charles announced that Catherine would represent him at national events, he was not merely bestowing power. He was entrusting hope, entrusting faith in a Britain that still could be healed. This explains why the public reaction was so intense. Social media didn't just spread hashtags like #CatherineLeads. They truly believed in her not because she is a princess, but because she is a woman who has lived, who has hurt, who has fought, and who has kept her heart intact. In an era where sincerity is rare, Catherine stands at the center of the storm but refuses to be swept away. Charles knows his time is limited. He also knows that, at the end of the day, the throne will belong to William. But in the most fragile moments of his life, he chose the one person capable of carrying his legacy without distorting it, and that person is none other than Catherine. And perhaps, somewhere, Diana is watching silently, because she knows for the first time in many years, a woman has stepped forward not by vying, not by swallowing tears, not by resisting through pain, but through a mission to lead not by title, but by trust. And it is precisely in this paradoxical combination that the British monarchy has discovered a new formula for survival: a king gradually stepping back for health, a prince heir anchoring continuity, and a princess emerging into the light not by title but by the trust of millions. When Charles chose Catherine to represent the crown in the present, it was not a biased or emotional choice, but a bold declaration: the new era needs a new symbol. And Catherine, the woman who overcame cancer, who transcended doubts about her commoner origins, who used compassion to heal cracks among the populace, is exactly that symbol. In 2024, when Catherine announced she was undergoing cancer treatment, Britain held its breath. Not for her royal title, but for the rare courage she displayed in a world of facades. She didn't hide, didn't rely on spokespeople, didn't shrink behind palace doors. She appeared thinner, more worn, but with a still bright gaze. She spoke in her own trembling voice about fear, about sleepless nights, about times she wondered if she'd ever see her children grow up. In that moment, Catherine ceased to be merely the Princess of Wales. She became the woman who represented millions fighting cancer. And the public, from single mothers to patients in royal hospitals, looked at her differently with eyes of hope. And then, just a year later, she returned. Without fanfare, without boasting about treatment outcomes. She quietly planted roses in cancer treatment centers, hugged patients still undergoing chemotherapy, and spoke openly about nausea, about bedbound days. She used her own pain to connect not with pity, but with profound empathy. And Charles saw that. He saw a new flame in the House of Windsor, a light he had been unable to rekindle since Diana's death. Charles understood that William was the rightful heir. William had stability, military experience, the cool head necessary for a long reign. But precisely because of that, William could not be the representative for the present, a present filled with turbulence, doubt, and craving a figure more symbolic than political. Catherine, with her gentle strength, with her ability to inspire trust through a single glance or touch, was the perfect answer. And William understood that too. He did not feel jealous. He did not doubt. On the contrary, he fully supported his father's decision, not only out of filial devotion, but also because of his deep love for the wife who had stood by him through life's greatest storms. To William, Catherine's position at the center of this transitional period was not a power grab, but an act of protection. He understood that the spotlight could be ruthless, but if Catherine was strong enough to step forward, he would be the first to stand behind her, unwavering as a wall. They say Charles is writing the final chapter of his reign. But perhaps he is actually writing the opening chapter for a new form of leadership, a monarchy not carried by one person alone, but orchestrated by a trio, a king with weathered experience, gradually stepping back, a calm heir waiting for his moment, and a princess once felled by cancer now rising as living proof of the power of compassion. Among hashtags like #Catherine Leads and #FutureQueen, people no longer speak much of titles or lineage. They speak of Catherine as a woman who has walked through darkness yet preserved a bright heart. And in a chaotic world, sometimes sincerity is the greatest power a royal family can wield. The throne. It remains silently awaiting the proper moment to pass to William. But for now, in the hearts of the public, Catherine is at the helm, not because she was chosen, but because she deserves it. And at that moment, after the press conference at Buckingham Palace, when the studio lights had yet to dim, became an irreversible turning point in Catherine's life. She stood there quietly, shedding tears, not for glory, not for the spotlight, but for a loss drawing closer than ever. Charles, the father-in-law who once embodied a controversial reign, had become an emotional anchor she never expected. She felt the fragility in every word he spoke, the fatigue in a voice that seemed steadfast but trembled, and the absolute trust he placed in her hands, not as a daughter-in-law, but as a spiritual heir, a guardian of the monarchy's legacy and future. That emotion was not just personal, it was a silent shockwave rippling through the palace halls. Catherine, once simply commoner Kate Middleton, now stood between two worlds, one for fun. Her small family with 3 children in need of their mother's arms, the other, a nation waiting for her to embody a model of trust and hope. Those tears, if shed publicly, might have been deemed weakness, but shed backstage, they became a symbol of a real heart, one that loves, fears, and embraces responsibility. As a mother, Catherine understood that every step she took from now on influenced not just the public, but carved into her children's souls. George was at a vulnerable age. Charlotte was perceptive enough to notice the looks around them. Louis, still too young to understand why his mother was so often absent. As a wife, she saw William staying up at night worrying about his father, watching him drift into introspective silence after each meeting with royal medical advisors. Catherine shared all that burden not through reproach, but through rare resilience. Her cancer experience had changed Catherine at her core. It had taken away innocence but given her profound empathy. And it was that empathy that made her see in Charles not a cold king or a past figure of controversy, but a man battling a betraying body while trying to hold onto a dynasty as though it were a fragile child. She did not cry for Charles's illness. She cried because he was still trying to be strong while the world only saw him as a symbol. No one bothered to look at the suffering man beneath the crown. And yet, at that emotional nadir, Catherine stood up like a flame replenished by fuel. She wiped away her tears, stepped out from backstage, and became a different version of herself, stronger, clearer, and more ready than ever. She knew she couldn't replace Charles, nor be another Diana, but she could be herself, a modern Catherine with an empathetic heart and a sacrificial spirit. And perhaps that was why Charles chose her, not because she was William's wife, but because she was the only one able to bridge the gap between monarchy and the public without shattering truth. That very same day, Catherine convened a private meeting with the royal communications advisors. She insisted that every message from this point on include a human element. No more glossy speeches alone, but genuine presence, hospital visits, listening to ordinary people, and answering difficult questions. She wanted a monarchy that felt closer, not by abandoning tradition, but by transforming tradition into soft power, a power that only flourishes when rooted in sincerity. In the eyes of the public, Catherine suddenly became a beacon amidst the fog of doubt. International media dubbed her Britain's humanitarian leader. Polls showed her approval rating skyrocketed within 24 hours of the press conference. Yet for Catherine, all those numbers pale before one truth. The real battle lies ahead, not with the media or protocol, but within her own heart, forever torn between the duties of a mother and the responsibilities of a leader, but she had already chosen. As she wiped away tears and stepped into the light, Catherine took the irreversible first step on her path. And this time there is no shield, no room for hesitation. She is the final bulwark for a monarchy under threat. And as Charles whispered backstage, in a trembling yet resolute voice, "Now is your moment." And just as Charles had whispered, "Now is your moment," the royal picture began to shift, not with fanfare, not with grand proclamations, but with eyes, with silent handholds weighted with meaning. William, standing beside his father during the press gathering, maintained his usual calm exterior. But to those who truly looked, his eyes told a different story. They were the eyes of a son deeply worried for his father, unable to hide the anxiety over his parents' deteriorating health. At the same time, in the look he gave his wife Catherine was profound pride. He knew that she had become more than a spouse. She was now the one shouldering the mission to uphold the royal image amid public storm and illness. Camalegueo, though stepping back from the center of power, still plays a crucial role. Anyone who thought she would oppose Charles's decision must have been surprised to learn she was the one encouraging Catherine to step forward. Having spent years in the royal spotlight, Camilla understands the dark side of the crown. She does not hesitate to offer advice how to handle the media, how to walk, how to maintain composure in front of hundreds of cameras trained on your chest. Though still a controversial figure, this time Camilla shows a subtle transformation from the woman blamed for a fractured family to a quietly supportive advisor. Meanwhile, at Sandringham's rear court, once a peaceful royal retreat, the atmosphere has shifted noticeably. George, Charlotte, and Louis, the three children carrying both duty and innocence, feel something momentous unfolding. Charlotte, sensitive and insightful, surprised everyone by asking her mother, "Will Grandpa be okay?" a question that stopped Catherine for a moment before she held her daughter tight. George is more reserved, but he lingers longer with his grandfather after tea, recounting small stories from school. Louis, innocent and joyful, is the one who still brings a smile to Charles's face on his toughest days, helping him forget reality's cruelty, even if only for a few minutes. It wasn't just William's small family. Other royal members also began drawing closer. Princess Anne, always cool and disciplined, began appearing more often in private meetings. She didn't speak much, but every nod or approving glance at Catherine was a silent yet powerful show of support. The Duke of Edinburgh, rare on the front pages, quietly maintained liaison with communications advisors, ensuring every strategy ran smoothly. In crisis, one sees the true nature of a family. And this time, after so many storms, division, and mistrust, the British monarchy presented a rare sight: unity, not out of obligation, but out of love, responsibility. And because of one woman, Princess Catherine, who stepped forward, carrying the hope the nation most needs right now. After all the upheaval at Buckingham Palace, after the dazzling lights of that globally shocking press conference, Catherine returned to Kensington with a heart still echoing with emotion. She had survived cancer, But survival is not light work. In 2020, when the doctor declared her officially cured, she faced a new reality: chronic fatigue, sleepless nights of worry, and the invisible burden called monarchy's future. Yet, honed by the instinct for survival from the months of fighting for her life, Catherine refused to collapse. She found herself again during dewy morning walks in Kensington Gardens, trailing among flowers and birdsong, no attendance, no protocol. There, she could be herself, a mother, a wife, a woman who had returned from death. Sometimes she sat at the old piano in the drawing room, letting the keys carry her soul to calm. But above all, the time spent with her children was her greatest source of energy. Charlotte snuggled into her. George asked about public engagements, and Louis made the family laugh with his innocent remarks. In those everyday moments, Catherine felt she was not alone. She had a reason to keep fighting, not just for the dynasty, but for the home she loves. Returning to the public eye, Catherine did not hide her recovery journey as a royal secret. On the contrary, she spoke candidly about her days of chemotherapy, about the paralyzing fear upon hearing the words cancer, about the times she felt she couldn't get out of bed. Those accounts, unembellished and tearless, yet filled with deep empathy, touched millions of hearts. At charity events, Catherine was not just a princess in a gown. She was someone who had once stood on the edge between life and death. And because of that, when she held the hand of another cancer patient, the connection was real. No media needed to bridge it. At the same time, Catherine began preparing for her leadership role with seriousness and strategic intent. She learned from seasoned royal diplomats, honed her political communication skills, sharpened her instincts by observing high-level meetings, and consistently listened to her trusted advisors. However, what set Catherine apart was not technique, but her ability to ask the right question. Does this truly bring value to the people? For Catherine, leadership was not about standing at the pinnacle of prestige, but about knowing when to kneel and touching others' hearts with truth and compassion. She prioritized family as a guiding compass, health as a gift never to be taken lightly, and purpose as the red thread connecting it all. Amid confidential meetings and diplomatic invitations, Catherine still asked herself, will my children be proud of me? That simple question kept her grounded in the face of overwhelming pressures from the throne. Catherine's strength didn't come from a flawless appearance or eloquent words. It came from a rare balance between emotion and responsibility. She cried, yet it kept moving. She feared, yet didn't run. She grew tired, yet remained open-hearted. And it was precisely this duality, gentle yet resilient, simple yet extraordinary, that made Catherine the ideal role model Charles had always hoped for, not because she was the wife of the heir, but because she was the only one who could turn scars into strength. And from there, lead an entire monarchy through its most fragile moment in history. Charles's decision was not merely a personal move in a time of declining health, but a historic turning point for the British monarchy. Choosing Catherine, a woman who had battled cancer, who had quietly endured the trials of royal life, sent a clear message. This is an era of authenticity, of empathy, and of genuine connection with the people. Despite past doubts about her outshining William, Catherine was honored thanks to her husband's public support and the quiet but steadfast backing of the royal family. Her future will not be easy, as she must balance the roles of mother and new leadership figure. But with initiatives focused on mental health, children, and in the environment, Catherine is reshaping the image of the monarchy into one that is more approachable and more accountable than ever before. And the question for all of us is, can she lead the monarchy through the turbulent waves and write a new chapter for Charles's legacy in a world that never stops changing?